num num. Birdie num num.
When I have understanding of computers, I shall be the supreme being. God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the silicon revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrots. Nipples for men.
Don't do that, Jesus Christ! You're gonna get me killed!
Out of here!
Oh, Billy.
I have nipples, Greg. Could you milk me?
Welcome, everybody, to AB Live. My name is Miguel, and I am your Pompatus of Gnosis. Welcome, everybody, to this day of Mars, this Tuesday. And for those of you who are watching on video and seeing the intro, the great idea or the great conundrum of nipples for men is still an issue. And hopefully, perhaps we will find out today if these engineers of humanity fell asleep at the wheel because they gave men nipples and 43 species of parrots. I mean, Enki, what were you thinking, my man? What were you thinking? You could have done much better than us little monkeys, especially the males with nipples and so forth. But anyway, I am simply wool gathering as you will. And tonight we're very excited because we will be talking about the Anunnaki with a book I really enjoyed, the Anunnaki Theorem by Eduardo Cano, or Esoteric Eddy. Eduardo, ¿cómo estás? And bienvenidos.
Hey, gracias. Estoy bien. I'm doing good. Glad to be back. Thank you. Thank you. Hello to everybody.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. Your show on Lucifer and your book was just amazing. One of the highest viewed shows in 2021 as the world went to hell. We wanted to find out more about Lucifer. So your research is definitely resounding with a lot of people too. So keep it up. Very excited. And with us too, we've got the Moondog Vance. Vance, all week I was wondering, will Vance have a pun for the Anunnaki? No, this will be the one time he's stumped, and because I couldn't think of it. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as far as the nipples for men goes, that's a little Enki Panky.
he nailed it. He nailed it. So good deal, man. Good deal. Well, awesome. Well, I see the chat room is already filling up very fast. We've got tonight sort of a combination of an interview and a presentation. We're just going to let it rip. As always, for all of you, if you have questions, we will definitely take your super chats. If you don't have a super chat, please write all caps, question marks. There are no guarantees we will get to you. Vance will try, but please don't be all butthurt or anything like that. We're doing the best we can with our little Gnostic team over here. So, and as far as some house cleaning before we get this party started, as always, support Eduardo and what he's doing. Get his books. His YouTube channel has got some very cool documentaries, well done, which gives you the visual part, and he just doesn't stick with European traditions, but he deals with Mesoamerica and so forth. Like this show, Aeon Bite, for reasons that I'm not going to ask, I'll say Hermes decided this year has been a year of dealing with Mesoamerica. And we've done many shows. The Astronosis Conference dealt with it. We did a show just a few days ago on the Pueblo Indians and the Mayans and the cult of the scalp and astrotheology. Next week, we'll be dealing with the cult of the mushroom in Aztec tradition. So for some reason, this needs to be done. And as I say, as the empire shifts, as the hologram shifts, as Western society collapses under its own hubris, it's a good time to look at the past for our ancestors, the spirits of this land, to find out cautionary tales, because they had empires, they had corruption, they had evil, but they also had some great perspectives on the stars, the human condition, art. So we want to look at them holistically and learn from them, just like we want to learn from the Sumerians and all other people. One point in time, men with nipples fucking up as they go, and hopefully a little good comes with that. I just got back from Portugal a few days ago, so I'm still a little jet lagged. The family's been sick. My daughter brought some cold, and we all got it. But so I'm getting back into it. And for those of you wondering, I haven't done a traditional show with a traditional intro because with traveling and so forth, I had to schedule more live shows. I couldn't really record or produce while I was in Portugal. So there will be more traditional shows coming, but of course, a lot of great live shows, Finding Hermes, and everything else. Autumn will be filled with a lot of gnosis, and I will share some of my experiences there for you, revelations. Like tomorrow, we have our Finding Hermes group, so I'll be talking about my Santo Daime experiences with ayahuasca. All I can say right now is whatever you do not mix ayahuasca with the Greek Orthodox Jesus prayer. Because we did it, and I went to hell. Literally went to hell. It was a real journey into hell. So, but I'll share more as we go, the different visions I have. So I think that's it. Yeah, I think now for you on YouTube, please support. I think there's a super thanks button. I never see it on this channel, but if you want to tip, donate, whatever, it's there on any of the videos. Anything you want to offer to keep the lights of the pleroma on. Yeah, I think that's it. This Pompatus of Gnosis doesn't have anything else to say except give some cool questions to Eddie. So, Eddie, tell us about what brought you to write and release the Anunnaki Theorem.
All right. So this is a re-release of the first book that I ever wrote. So I have two books under my resume, the Anunnaki Theorem, the Lucifer Mystery Revealed. But I originally published the Anunnaki Theorem back in 2018. So I was younger then, much more eager and less fortified as a writer. So the original publication it just sucked, to say the least. But after I released the Lucifer Mystery Revealed, which I actually spent 2 years writing and invested in having it professionally edited and all that, I decided to go back to my original work, my first book, and do it some justice. So I spent this entire year, or the earlier half of this year, diving deep and just pretty much gutted the old book and rewrote an entire new book to do the topic justice.
Awesome, man. Awesome. And yeah, in this book, you're definitely more personal about your life. I could certainly relate. You were, like much of us, a curious misfit who didn't fit. So tell us about that. I think you talk about being a kid, raised Roman Catholic like Vance and I, and you would wonder about hell. And I used to do same thing. I used to sit in the dark and scare myself like shitless about hell. It's like, oh, well, what happens now? Does God create a new body for me and he just burns me? What happens after 1 billion years? Will I get used to the heat? And you drive yourself crazy. So you had that too, right?
Yeah. Religion has always been the center of my studies with the esoteric and the occult, because I grew up in a religious household, Catholic and Christian, and my entire life has revolved around the esoteric. I mean, some of my earliest memories involve, coming across knowledge or having experiences or having conversations with, like, my grandpa, for example, about aliens and stuff like that. So ever since I was a kid, I've always been open-minded and always aware that there was more to this life and that there was more hidden behind the Bible and its stories. And I was always an anti-establishment person ever since I was young, always getting into trouble, not so privy to listening to authority and stuff like that. So having both of those attributes as a young person, diving deep and always wanted to look more into things, and also being anti-establishment, that was basically the perfect recipe to set me off onto this esoteric path of always wanting to look into things myself and not just going for what the mainstream historians and scholars and whatever were telling us the truth was.
Good deal. Yeah. And I think we are making a difference for generations. For example, My children are being raised Catholic. That's the deal I made with my wife, and that's fine. But tonight I was very happy. My 10-year-old daughter, Evie, came up to me and said, I know what I want to be for Halloween. I said, what? And she said Coraline from the movie, which is based on Neil Gaiman's. And I was like, that's the greatest Gnostic childhood film you could do. And Coraline she is a Sophianic character. I was like, yes, winning on the underground, slowly but surely. But yeah, and you talk about what you were staring at a dollar bill, and you're like, holy crap. That also sent you on a rabbit hole too.
Yeah, it's like everything came to a head right around 2006 for me. So it was the summer going into the seventh grade for me at that time. And so it was a melting pot of just all different experiences. So I was getting into cannabis for the first time around then. As crazy as that sounds, but that was normal from where I came up. So I was getting into cannabis. I was listening to a lot of underground hip hop music that spoke about a lot of these things in the songs. And for the first time was reading and researching these things on the internet, early YouTube days, early, just like new age stuff. And so me and my cousin, we love to sit there and just talk about deep things. And for the first time ever, I was just looking at a dollar bill and I started looking at it and was just like, man, what is all this stuff? Like, what does it mean? Because I heard some artists speaking about it in songs, specifically like Immortal Technique, who played a huge role in my waking up as a young person, and like Jedi Mind Tricks. So I would sit there and be like, man, what are these seals? What are these symbols? So we decided to start looking into that on his big bulky computer that he had back in the day. And I remember just sitting there for hours and hours, like just going down a rabbit hole, like what Knights Templars, Freemasons, and all these things. In my mind, just ever since then, has just been open to this influx of information.
Awesome. And what was the question? Were there any outside things that also changed you? A lot of people, especially younger people, 9/11, the 2008 crash, the Iraq War, which you talk about in your book. It's always very interesting that, as some conspiracy theories said, the Iraq War was because things disappeared from the museum, and Saddam himself wanted to raise the glory of Babylon and Sumer, and he wanted that power, and these things disappeared. And we all know the elite love these artifacts for whatever shenanigans they do. But do you any outside things that really woke you up or made you pause at the official narrative of our world?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have like a huge 9/11 event. I mean, I remember 9/11. I was like in the third or fourth grade when that happened. And I remember just the adults being concerned, and I just remember feeling that there was a shift in our world. And I was old enough to know a little bit of politics. And for whatever reason, I knew at that time that George Bush was bad. And again, I was a very vulgar and crazy kid. So, and I loved rock music. I still love rock music. So I remember making a song about 9/11, and I don't even know like how I came up with this, but I remember making a song called "Where the Fuck Were You When 9/11 Happened?" And I would just play it to my friends, and they just loved it. And so I don't know how or why, but I just knew that something huge had happened, and there was a huge shift in everything, and that George Bush was not to be trusted. But for me, primarily being the youngest of four kids, older sister, two older brothers, I was always, getting all this new music and new information and being influenced by them. And I was heavily influenced by Pink Floyd and Hendrix and Bob Marley.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of the wall and the government, so for all of that to be happening at that time in my life, I just knew as early as the third grade that the government was not to be trusted. And that played a huge role in how I would develop as a person. For example, in high school, many years later, my first clothing brand that I ever had, which I have tattooed on two places on my arm, on my body, was Kill Gov, standing for Kill Government. It's been discontinued, but there are some people out there from my hometown and stuff in SoCal that still rep it, and still have the jackets and beanies and stuff.
Very cool. Love your vibe, man. All right. Well, I see the audience is filling up. Good to see you, Anders. It's good to see you. I'm sure you're up late. A great musician. Good to see Statira. I don't want to say her real name. H.P. Lovecraft is joining us. Always good. Who else is there? Gnosis Junkie, how you doing? I'm trying to just scroll down here. Well, a good group, and I'm sure there'll be some good questions tonight. So,
but I will say too, if I may,
sure.
I did like get into psychedelics early too as a young person, and of course, anytime you do that for the first time, that's just like, whoa, that's mind blowing because you realize that the brain and the mind are capable of things that you never thought. So psychedelics played a huge role too in my early life, and the paranormal too. I grew up with like strange paranormal activity and still do sometimes, and try to keep that at bay. I try not to pay too much attention to paranormal stuff because it can mess with your mind and mental health issues and stuff like that. But yeah, there's a lot of strange little things like that all throughout my life, that played a role in this too.
Yeah, it's a journey. It's all by design, your awakening. So awesome. Well, let's get into some, as Van says, Enki Panky. Let's get to you start with one of the central ideas is digging the source. What is that? And what did you come discover about the Anunnaki?
Yeah, sure. So the book is pretty much a brief, chronological expose of how the concept of God even began. Where did it all start? And how did we end up with monotheism? So that's pretty much the mission of the book is how did we end up with monotheism? Where did this whole idea of one God really come from? And so when we go back in time and dig through all of history and watch it unfold, if you will, through all the writings and the historical events, then you can trace it all back to a certain source where it all started. And so in the beginning, in the first chapter, I kind of just detail some of the more famous creation stories and show how they all have a similarity and where those similarities might have began originally. For example, one of the oldest religious texts that we have available to us are the pyramid texts that were written in Old Egypt. It's the Old Egyptian script in the 3rd millennium BC. And they were supposedly constructed under King Unas, who was the last of the 5th dynasty. And these were officially studied by French archaeologists and Egyptologists, Gaston Maspero, in the 1800s. And so these are some of the oldest religious texts still available to us, about 4,000 different lines. Oh, and sorry, I should mention, Miguel, the first 4 images in that folder are the pyramid text, if you want to throw those up.
Yeah, let's take a look at them.
1 through 4. So, yeah, so those are the pyramid texts. So there's, I think, like a few different pyramids in Saqqara, Egypt. And inside of them, they're just riddled with all these writings, about 4,000 lines. So images 1 through 4, you can just kind of just scroll through them. Mm-hmm. And they tell what they are is they're random spells and incantations, pretty much meant to be chanted as the pharaoh is being buried, or through the ceremonial burial ritual. And it's basically preparing the soul. What they are is preparing the pharaoh's soul for the journey in the afterlife and helping that soul be taken there. Very strange stuff. And they talk about, they don't mention heaven because that's a later word, but they talk about the destination for the soul of being this place called the Field of Reeds, which, of course, is an imagery that they would be familiar with, being by the Nile River, with the reeds and stuff like that. But they also call that destination the place of imperishable stars. And for anybody who's read Sitchin, who obviously is the guy who brought us the whole Anunnaki stuff, Zechariah Sitchin, he used a lot of this stuff in his book Stairway to Heaven, which primarily focused around the Egyptian aspect of the Anunnaki, to corroborate his theories and claims about Nibiru or Planet X. But in his book, he calls it the imperishable star, and he says, look, In the pyramid text, they talk about the imperishable stars. So, that's Planet X, Nibiru. But if you actually read it, it doesn't say imperishable stars. It says place of imperishable stars, plural.
Mm.
But so it's a true text, and also coupled with many other stories throughout Egyptian history, there's a strange story told about the creation of the universe. And in that story, we have this watery darkness, as it's described, this water of chaos, water of blackness, this plasma, if you will. And out of that watery darkness was born the first consciousness by the name of Atum, Atum. And Atum was androgynous, and then Atum self-creates itself, and then after Atum, the elements are born, like air and earth, and then after the elements, the gods are born, and then eventually humans are born. And in later Egyptian writings, it is told that the humans, or certain humans, try to kill the god Ra, engaged him in war or battle, and because of that, the gods were ashamed of the humans and pretty much killed many of them or something like that, and then left. They left to heaven or the place of imperishable stars, and then left us here to our own devices. And so that's the Egyptian aspect of it. And of course, there's a correlation with that in the Bible, when the Bible in Genesis states that, and I'll quote here, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." So in a lot of these ancient cosmologies, we have this idea of this darkness, this blackness, but it's like this watery substance. And then out of that, the consciousness of God is born. And also, like God in Genesis, Atum was also able to speak life into existence. As the first few passages of Genesis state, God is basically speaking life into existence. He said there will be light, and there was light, so on and so forth. And the vocal aspect of creation is seen throughout a lot of these cosmological tales, and is also kind of tied in with the whole idea of the Aum chant, or the Om chant. The Om chant in Hinduism and Buddhism, if I understand it correctly, is the underlying frequency in all things, and that frequency is the frequency of the creator. So when we are chanting Om, we are tuning and harmonizing ourselves to that original vocalized manifestation.
Yeah, I should just let me interject a second. That's as April DeConnick says, that's the big telltale sign that the Gnostics might have been influenced more by Egyptian. They came from Egypt. There's many reasons, but theologically, because in their texts, like the Nassenes, the creation starts in this moisture with this serpent that comes out, and Atum also he inseminates his own mouth and gives birth, and there's this sort of sexual thing in a lot of the Gnostic texts, how creation, which you don't find really in Hellenistic lore and others. So there's some hints right there, but yeah, go on.
Yeah, that's cool. So another old religion that I detail is Zoroastrianism, and its legendary beginnings go back to the second millennium BC, but they're usually agreed to about 600 BC. And so Zoroastrianism follows the beliefs and teachings of the prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster. And prior to Zarathustra bringing his revelation, his kingdom, his people were polytheistic. And he comes from Iran. He was an Iranian prophet. So the old Persian world that he came out of was polytheistic. But he was raised up by the priesthood in his early teen years, and right around 30 years old, he had a vision by a river where he saw the emissary Vohu Maha. And Vohu Maha spoke to him about the creator of all, or the benevolent God of all, known as Ahura Mazda. And later on, Zarathustra would also talk to Ahura Mazda, and Ahura Mazda would let him know that there were two forces in this dualistic universe. There was Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, and so there was two forces in the universe, according to Zarathustra, and they were both sentient. The good God, the God of good light, and then the God of evil thoughts or evil deeds, Angra Mainyu. And So Zoroastrianism its legendary roots go back to 1400 BC with its writings and its ideals, but it was in the early 4th century of the Common Era that the Sasanian Empire of the Persians officially wrote down the books of Zoroaster, which are known as the Avesta.
Mm-hmm.
And the first European translation of the Avesta was in 1771. Now, the oldest parts of the Avesta are the Gathas, which are said to be a section of writings and teachings directly from Zarathustra. The rest are kind of like added on. But Zoroastrianism has certain hints going back to the Rig Veda.
Mm-hmm.
And Zoroastrianism and Hinduism both share a common ancestor, philosophically, religiously, and even culturally in certain other aspects, and maybe even ethnically. And that cultural ancestor is the Indo-Europeans, or specifically, the Indo-Europeans. And so the Indo-Europeans, as the theory goes, are the originators or the progenitors of all pretty much Western civilizations, like the Germanic, the English, the Russian, so on and so forth, Anglo-Saxon, and so on. And so the Persian culture stems from these Indo-Europeans. And one of the oldest texts belonging to the Indo-European people that we have belongs to the Hittites, going back to about the fourth millennium BC. And the Hittites spoke of this storm god, and they called him Seo Sumen, which roughly translate as our God. And Seos, meaning God, could also be an etymological root for the Indo-European word Dios, which also became the Greek Zeus, and the Latin Dios. And that's coming from the Hittite Anita text. So the Indo-Europeans also had a branch known as the Indo-Iranians. That's the word I was looking for earlier. So the early Persians and Zoroastrianism stemmed from the Indo-Iranians, who were a branch of the Indo-Europeans. Again, this theoretical group of nomadic tribal people who held the source and who were the originators for a lot of the Western language and culture. But what makes what I'm getting at is that one of the oldest Indo-Iranian texts is the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda is the oldest of the Vedas, which influenced Zoroastrianism and later Hinduism. And it was written probably around 1700 to 1100 BC. And the Rig Veda has a creation story known as the Nasadiya Sukta, which I have a version of on my YouTube channel, which is beautiful. It's like I think like an hour long of it just being looped. It's a chant. Again, all these creation stories back in the old world were meant to be chanted. But like the Egyptian version and the biblical version, in the Nasadiya Sukta, the first before anything is created, there is this watery darkness. Mm-hmm. And out of that watery darkness, the first consciousness is self-created. And I don't know how to say this word or this name, but it's spelled TVSATR. So it's like I've just been saying Sated. There's probably one or two of the words or letters are silent. I don't know which one. But I saw this being Sated. He was like Atum, or the biblical Yahweh. He was self-created, and then after Sated was self-created out of this watery darkness, then the elements are created, and then the archetypal gods are created, and then humans are created. So you have all these different versions: the Egyptian, the Indo-Iranian, the biblical one. Now, going further back than all of those is the Enuma Elish, which belonged to the Sumerians, which was later rewritten by the Babylonians. I think that the best version we have is actually the Babylonian version, the most complete version. And this tale was actually so important that it used to be played out every year at the Babylonian New Year festival known as Akitu. And coming from L.W. King's 1902 translation, we see, again, the similarity as I'll quote here. When in the height, heaven was not named, and the earth beneath did not yet bear a name, there was the primeval Apsu and the mother of the gods, Tiamat. Their waters mingled together. So again, you have this just emptiness, this void. But in this version, there are the two gods, Apsu and Tiamat, and their waters, whatever that means, mingled together. And so, of course, the origin for all this is the Sumerian version here, as we see in the Enuma Elish. And what's interesting is, again, Sitchin uses this tale, the Enuma Elish, to corroborate his Nibiru and Planet X theories. And actually, in the Enuma Elish, we do see the word Nibiru mentioned towards the end of the epic, and it is mentioned as the shining star in the skies. But it's not like apparently like this planet, this rogue planet, as Sitchin makes it out to be. But nonetheless, in the epic, Tiamat she's the protagonist, or sorry, she's the antagonist, and then she gets cut in half by the protagonist, which is Marduk. And interestingly, as she gets cut in half, one half of her is used as a firmament. And so this is where the biblical idea of the firmament comes from. Again, from L.W. King's version, I'll quote here. He split her up like a flat fish into two halves. One half of her he established as a covering for heaven, not to let her waters come forth. And
yeah, but isn't the reason they fight, isn't it because the gods were being noisy and Tiamat and her consort couldn't sleep? It's a great story. And obviously the idea, Tiamat represents nature, Marduk represents civilization, order, agriculture. What's gotten out of hand in our days is, I keep saying in the show, Tiamat needs to, come back. And obviously you see this story all over the world, right? I mean, even in the Bible, Yahweh battles Leviathan. He plays the role of Marduk, and Leviathan is Tiamat, or the serpent goddess, if you would.
Yeah, it's a long tale, but yeah, so it's Apsu, Tiamat, and then their like little messenger or little buddy Gaga, and then you have 6 children, and then those 6 children become noisy or rebellious, and so Tiamat goes against them, and then out of nowhere, the protagonist, this rogue hero, who's known as Marduk in the Babylonian version, comes in. And so as you read it for face value, it sounds like you're reading a tale about these gods fighting. But as Sitchin saw it, which might be true, it's more like an astrotheological tale. It's actually telling us how our solar system came to be, because you have Apsu, the sun, Tiamat, the mythological watery planet, which would later become Earth after it was cut in half, Gaga, Mercury, which is the closest to the sun, and then you have the 6 other gods, which are the 6 other planets. And interestingly, after Tiamat is cut in half, as it says here again, one half of her he established as a covering for heaven, not to let her waters come forth. And that's basically paraphrasing the Bible when God is making, the earth and the planets, and he says that he set up a firmament to separate the waters from the waters. And Sitchin saw the firmament, or that covering, as being the asteroid belt, which actually separates the inner planets from the outer planets.
Yeah, it should be mentioned too. I think some say that Marduk also plays the role of the first Jesus, because I think and he gets swallowed by Tiamat, and like Drax in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, he's able to come out and defeat her or break her open. So that's where you get sort of the hero that has fallen and resurrects at the last second.
Yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot that was spawned from that. And again, the whole Nibiru aspect of it, because again, Sitchin uses this to corroborate his theories on Nibiru. So at the end of the epic, after Marduk kills Tiamat and everything, he's praised by the gods, and he's praised by 50 different names. And one of those names is Nibiru. They say he is Nibiru, the shining star in the skies that shepherds the other gods, or something strange like that. But there are 49 other titles that he's given. So I just think it's a little disingenuous to just accentuate the Nibiru one as if like that's evidence for Planet X.
And then they say there's Gaga, Radio Gaga.
Yeah.
But Marduk doesn't become the king of the gods, does he? I mean, it's what's the name? Anu becomes the king of the gods, doesn't he?
Well, in the Babylonian version, Marduk is the king of the gods.
He's the king of the gods.
Yeah, Anu's phased out pretty early in human history. He was like old Sumerian, but he's always in the background, and even like up to like the Hittite era, and but he's always in the background. He's mentioned here and there.
Yeah, I mean, Marduk was a patron of Babylon, and as history says, Cyrus bribed the priest. That's why Cyrus was basically took Babylon with barely a shot fired, very little casualties, because he was a smart guy. Bribe people, bribe the priests and the administrators and the cops. Like the CIA does, where they bribe the police and the army and say, "Put down your weapons," and then they can just walk in. So.
Yeah, and as you kind of mentioned earlier, so the whole thing with Tiamat, like how we need her now to, quell everything that's going on.
Balance.
That whole thing. There's a interesting take on this by a scholar by the name of Reverend A.E. Watham, which I detail in my new book. And he was writing from the early 1900s, and he has this essay known as the Yahweh to Home myth, and he realized this correlation with the Enuma Elish and the early story of Genesis. And what he realized was that the biblical writers knew about the Enuma Elish and were cleverly, if that's a word, but they were basically, rewriting it so that from their perspective, their God, instead of Marduk, was the one who was subduing Tiamat. And I'll quote from his essay right here. After first creating light, Yahweh next proceeds to subdue or bring under control the surging waters of the turbulent abyss. He then divides it into two portions, making of the one of the upper and of the other the lower ocean. To keep the upper waters in their place, he creates a dome-like support, rakia, correctly rendered in all our versions, firmament. So in that story in Genesis, it's just a retelling of the Enuma Elish with Yahweh envisioned as Marduk now. So it's Yahweh, the God of the Jews now, who's the protagonist, who is subduing the waters and the chaos of the early creation.
Yeah, I think Marduk is really the real identity of Yahweh. I think if you read like Margaret Barker's work, The Great Angel, the original Yahweh was sort of this desert demon or angel. He was vampiric, but he was nurturing. He took care of the tribe, just like these entities took care of their tribes. And then slowly the priests kind of brought in Marduk, because Marduk represented civilization, like the Monty Python, roads, the wine, all the good stuff that you wanted to start building a civilization, have money in the bank and crops and all that. But to do that, to have a civilization, you have to subjugate nature. To subjugate nature, unfortunately, you have to marginalize women. That's just the way it is. And we're having this talk because we're trying to find other solutions where Tiamat can come back to the table, right?
Absolutely. And to wrap it up on that subject, what was fascinating too is Reverend A.E. Watham suggested, or I guess realized, that the word used in the Bible, the Hebrew word used in the Bible for abyss or darkness, is Tehom. And apparently Tehom is actually like a Hebrew cognate to Tiamat. So it's almost like right in our face that Tiamat is actually rewritten into the Bible.
Yeah, that is very cool. Awesome. Vince, do you have a question or from the audience?
Yeah, no questions from the audience yet, but I was wondering, how about the Babylonian Talmud? Is there any links there that can, give us hints as to how the transfer between, the Babylonians and Sumerians happened into the Old Testament?
I don't have much to say on the Babylonian Talmud. I wish I did, but I kind of touch on the subject somewhat towards the end of the book, which we can get into later when I show kind of like how monotheism was instituted and why it was instituted. Because the Babylonian Talmud came fairly early in the institution of Judaism, right along with the Torah. And what made Judaism so strong and strong today is its institutionalization of the Torah and being able to organize all its people and the priesthood. But there's a lot of factors that played a role in that historically. For example, when they were released from the Persians, from the Babylonian captivity, the Persians were tolerant of them. The Persians were colleagues of them. They allowed them to
Cyrus
express.
helped them build the temple, the second temple.
Yeah, so right out of the Babylonian captivity, Cyrus allowed them to go back home or stay in Babylon. Some of them stayed in Babylon and continued a priesthood there. And then, so by the time the Greeks came in, they were already fortified as a priesthood. They knew what they were doing. They had their people locked down in this institution, for better or for worse. And there are tales that I mentioned in the book that when Alexander the Great showed up to conquer the Persian Empire, he actually had immense respect for the priesthood, the Judaic priesthood, and actually bowed down before one of their leading priests. And, there's a huge respect between the Greeks and the Judaic world. Of course, a lot of other things happened and stuff too that were caused tensions, but they carried on into the Roman era. Again, the Roman allowed them to do their thing. And so after the old world was destroyed, the Romans, the Greeks, and the Persians, after they were destroyed, the Jews kept going. The Judaic institution kept going. And because they were able to survive all of those epics in time, they've been able to be as successful as they are today.
Cool. All right. Well, anything from your presentation you want to show? I'm surprised nobody's asking you. Nobody in the group is asking you straight up, do you think the Anunnaki are aliens? Because they come up with the idea of engineering humans as slaves, which is, again, that the Gnostics took that. Other religions, the Greeks did take it. I mean, Zeus had Prometheus create humans to be his slaves, basically to be servants. So it was in the air, but the Anunnaki were really one of the first ones, right?
Yeah. So I was going to actually transition into like the creation stories. So all of that was just pretty much prepping everybody to understand that the creation stories all go back to the Sumerian version.
Mm-hmm.
They're all exaggerated or added on or fanatical versions of the original Enuma Elish. So if we take that into understanding, then everything kind of starts to make sense. And I always use the flood story as like a key example of that. So of course, the flood story in the Bible is one God being hesitant to kill us off, eventually agreeing to save us through the bloodline of Noah. But we now know without any doubt that was borrowed or revised through the Sumerian tale of Atrahasis. Mm-hmm. And in that tale, it's two gods, not one god, two brother gods, debating whether or not to kill us all off. And it's one god, Enki, who cleverly, there I go with that word again, who, decides to save us, through Atrahasis. So if we understand that, that all these religions stem from the Sumerian tales and mythology, then we can start to finally answer a lot of these bigger questions. So going with human creation. So there are texts from the Sumerians that talk about us being created by them from a few instances, at least from what's available to us. And there's a Sumerian Akkadian text, a bilingual text known as the Creation of Humankind. And I'm going to quote directly from that right now. And it says, "Let us create humankind from their blood." It was some Anunnaki that are earlier mentioned in this text. "Their labor shall be labor for the gods, to maintain the boundary ditch for all time, to set the pickaxe and work basket in their hands, to make the great dwelling of the gods worthy to be their sublime sanctuary, for celebrating the gods' festivals as they should." So right there, they made us from their blood. They made us from Anunnaki blood to labor for them. And that is reflected in the Bible to a certain extent. God creates us in his own image. Image, as Sitchin would say, is his DNA, it's blood,
nipples for men.
Yeah, God's like, I got nipples, you guys got to have nipples. But and there's other stories that share the same thing. There's another one known as Enki and Ninmah, and the Enki and Ninmah text, the gods, the lower ranking gods, are the ones doing all the labor, but then they get pissed off and they're like, yo, we don't want to do this anymore. So they petition for Enki and Ninmah, the scientists, to create some surrogate AI worker. So in that text, which is thousands of years old, they decide to go to their laboratory and create us out of a mixing of blood and what they call clay, which could be actual clay, or it could be some term lost to us, or just some metaphorical term, but they make us out of the mixing of their blood and clay. And obviously the Bible got that whole idea of making Adam out of clay from this.
Yeah, and also it wasn't like a straight line. It's not all of a sudden that they made Eduardo and Miguel and Vance and ooh, look at these guys. We made the perfect human. No, they were mistakes, right? They created some deformed and handicapped humans, but it was just very nice. These humans still had a place in society, which I thought is very cool. That in Sumerian society, not like the Greeks that killed off, they were, as they say, ableists, but in Sumerian society, if you were disabled, you could still participate in the culture and be a productive member of the society.
Yeah, exactly. In that text, they go through a series of mistakes. They create like these deformed people, and it talks about it in the text, like somebody who like doesn't have arms, and some other guy, strangely enough, like just can't stop urinating, like just these weird defects until they eventually perfect it. So there's obviously some scientific process here. It's not like they're just these magical beings who wave a wand and create us. There's some process going on here.
That's why it's so science fiction. There's a laboratory kind of, and he's
hackers.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So I'm looking at the photos now. We skipped a bunch, but it's all good. They're just like random pictures just to kind of like illustrate some of what we're talking about.
Well, I was still on 4.
Yeah, that was my bad. I forgot to say next photo and stuff like that. But I think right now we're on 9.
Yeah, there's Zoroastrianism. There's Zorro.
Yep.
That's yes. Okay. There's the
Indo-european
migration. We need a refresher sometimes during the.
Well, this is interesting. Leave it right there, for example, because I've been talking to a friend of mine, and she's from Ukraine, or her family is, and she was talking about how interesting that there's so much attention to Ukraine right now. And I never realized until we started talking recently that there's a lot of interesting history with Ukraine, like going all the way back thousands of years. And as you can see, like the Indo-European migration came from that center area. Just a thought.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, there's always an occult mystic angle to this. Somebody's looking for treasure or artifacts, or if they claim this land, they get magical powers. It's the same shit with every war. Okay, and this is what
that's the Rig Veda with the Enuma Elish there, and then
Who are those lovers?
That's supposed to be Apsu and Tiamat.
Oh, well, they look very human.
Right there, that's when I was talking about Reverend A.E. Watham, that's Yahweh subduing Leviathan, who some scholars think is a re-envisioning of Tiamat. Because literally in Sumerian text or Sumerian glyphs, you'll see Marduk just like that, slaying a dragon.
Let's look at some other imagery.
And there's the firmament, the hammered out bracelet, as it's sometimes called, aka the asteroid belt, separating the lower waters planets from the upper waters, the outer planets.
And you say that Zechariah Stitchin, I think he says in the Sodom and Gomorrah story that the two angels were Anunnaki. Where's he getting that idea? It's like,
yeah, so he stretches a lot of things because in his mind, and as I understand it too, it's like all of these tales, all these Abrahamic faiths, specifically the tales coming from the Abrahamic faiths, and some of them outside of that, are all pretty much borrowing or retelling or even adding on to the Sumerian mythology. It's like there's only one human history, right? There's only one human history. And as far as we know right now, the one we're currently in goes back to about 9,000 BC or whatever, but there's only one human history. So if all throughout human history there are these deities visiting us and all have similar attributes and messages and experiences, then they obviously have to be the same deities. So in his mind, it's like when the Bible's talking about these angels who are physical men visiting Abraham and Lot, a couple thousand years ago, they of course were none other than the Anunnaki, who were also being talked about a few thousand years ago from contemporaneous cultures.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll definitely you got a good section on the Book of Enoch, but we can get on that later on. or when you want, whenever you want. And what do we have here? This is the creation of humans.
Yeah.
And the humans, yeah, that's she's called the mother of the living, which the Bible takes. And then it's the Gnostics were closer because she is, I think, superior to Adam, which is what in the Gnostic text, Eve is either equal or superior to Adam. Let's see.
Oh, that's Enki and Enuma. That's a sketch from a Sumerian tablet. So that's Enki and Enuma getting ready to make mankind.
Mm.
And there's
Is that the laboratory?
Yeah, super expensive.
Maybe they were making COVID too. Oh, I'm gonna get killed by the algorithm. I'm gonna get censored. I shouldn't have said that word. Yeah, Nimna and Enki were making the Rona in their thing. All right. So now we got what, colonial times?
Yeah, we could pause there. So just real quick, I think it's important to talk about, how we even discovered Sumer, and how we even deciphered Sumerian, because it's important, I think, at least as from an educational standpoint.
Yeah.
Because we had no idea about the Sumerians and all of this stuff prior to the 1800s. They were lost in time. So a lot of this stuff is still somewhat fresh. It's still new, and that's why it's been difficult to have the mainstream media and mainstream historians and stuff like that integrate this into our history. But within the 150 years since we've discovered the cuneiform scripts of Sumer, only about 10% have been deciphered. And there are over tens of thousands held in different collections around the world. And it is estimated that about 500,000, so 500,000, if not 1 million, have been found. So there's at least probably like 1 million that have been found all throughout the Middle East, modern Mesopotamia. But only about 10% of that has been publicly translated, if that. So there's a lot that we still don't know, or there's a lot that is being held from us. There's still a lot. But we discovered it in the 1800s, and there were certain scholars that stand out, such as J.S. Buckingham, Sir Henry Layard, who were among the first to excavate some stuff there and put up whole projects to continue excavating. But what allowed us to go there and do these excavations was that in the early 1800s, the Ottoman provinces of modern day Near East, Syria, Palestine, and Iraq became more open to foreign travelers. So because of that, some of these early scholars and whatnot went over there and started digging around and found this stuff. And fairly quickly, as we started to translate it, we realized that this was a gold mine in human history. And what made it possible to translate all of this stuff and decipher it was the behistun inscription. So if you go to photo number 23, it's a photo of the number.
I got 23. Wait, is that it? Am I too far?
Yeah. It's photo number 23.
Well, this one's 23.
What the heck? Yeah, no, the file name should be actual 23. It might be like flipped around on.
Let me look at where's it? I can look real quick. Because I have all these things.
Yeah, you're super ahead though.
23. Where are you? 23.
Well, I'll keep going as
here. Maybe I can do. Hold on, let me try this. I can do a screenshot. Yeah, something got lost. Let me remove you. Let me do a screen share. This is the one, right?
Yeah, there we go. Yep. So that's the behistun inscription. And so it was made by King Darius around 522 to 486 BC in eastern Iran. And it details a victory made by King Darius. And it details this victory in 3 different languages: Old Persian, Babylonian, and Elamite, which are all relatives of the ancient Sumerian text and language. And they're all written in a cuneiform script. So we got to the task of deciphering each of those three cuneiform scripts. And so when we deciphered those, then we were able to go back in time and basically reverse engineer Babylonian, Akkadian, and then Sumerian. So it was all due to the behistun inscription right there that we were able to finally read Sumerian. And I detailed that whole process in my book. There's a few different scholars that played a huge role in that. I won't go too deep into it in this presentation, but just to sum it up, famed Assyriologist Samuel Noah Kramer, as you'll see in image number 30.
All right, let's go to this one. Okay. Where was it?
Right there. Just past
This
it.
dude?
Before that guy.
This dude?
No, before him. Right there. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's Samuel Noah Kramer, one of the most famous Assyriologists, wrote a lot on the Sumerians, Assyrians. And so he accredited Edward Hincks, Henry Rawlinson, and Jules Oppert as the holy triad of cuneiform decipherment. So it was those three dudes that I detail in my book that were able to decipher this for us. And it was actually Jules Oppert who decided to call these people the Sumerians, because he realized in certain tablets that we were finding, we kept coming across these titles of kings who were calling themselves kings of Sumer and Akkad. We knew about Akkad at that time, but we didn't know about Sumer. So they were like, yo, there's this other place called Sumer. And we kept finding these tablets that were written in cuneiform, but in a language we couldn't understand. Because cuneiform is it's a style of writing. It's a font. It's not a language. So we kept finding these tablets that were written in cuneiform font or style, but in a language we didn't understand. So eventually, after we cracked the behistun inscription through the works of Hincks, Rawlinson, and Oppert, we were able to finally understand Sumerian. And that's how we got the story of the Anunnaki.
Cool. And should we mention, Sumer was not just one monolithic empire. It was different provinces and nobles and whatever. It was never, I think only the Hammurabi was able to create consolidate the kingdom, or...
Yeah, well, Hammurabi came much later, pretty much after Sumer was already gone. But you're right, Sumer, as I detail it in the book too, Sumer was never like a unified kingdom. It was always city-states.
Right.
And kind of like capture the flag, there was always one ruler rising up from one city-state trying to take it all over. And it was just always going back and forth, back and forth. And we have some pretty brutal stories coming from their text about those times of, one king rising up and just killing everybody from that city and taking over. And so it was just a constant battle. Excuse me. And the Sumerians actually called themselves the Sagiga, the black-headed people. So they didn't call themselves the Sumerians. It was I believe the Akkadians who called themselves the Sumerians, which means land of the kings.
Interesting.
But there's I detailed it in the book. There's just a long history. Pretty much all of Sumer's early history is them fighting with each other, and each city had its own ruler, its own priest, and its own patron deity, its own god that they justified everything through. And towards the height of its intellectual culture, it had 12 major city states. But towards the end, they were overtaken by the Akkadians through the rulership of Sargon of Akkad. So it was Sargon of Akkad who came through first, who pretty much took advantage of their vulnerability, of the fact that they were never unified. So he came through and took advantage of that and was able to take it all under his rulership. And I'm just looking at the pictures here. I don't think I have a picture of him, but the whole story of Sargon is very interesting too. So Sargon, we know very little of, but we do have some texts and some seemingly autobiographical texts of his. And the Akkadians worshipped Inanna. So they actually worshipped the goddess. And in one of his autobiographical texts, it is stated that he was born from a priestess. His mother was a priestess of the temple of Inanna. And as she became pregnant, she had to hide that pregnancy. And so she hid the pregnancy, and then she birthed Sargon. and she put them in a basket and floated them down a river. Just
That
like
sounds
the
familiar.
Moses
God, I've
story.
heard that before. Oh, yes, Moses, of course.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so you have all of these stories and all of these motifs and stuff going back to the Sumerians and the early Mesopotamians. But as Sargon was floated down the river, as the tales say, he was picked up by this humble gardener from Sumer known as Aki. And Aki raised him, and then eventually he grew to be strong and realized who he was and where he came from. There was a sort of like immaculate conception thing there too, because he never knew his father, so there's this weird immaculate conception thing going on there too. But he appealed to the normal people because at that time all the Sumerian kings justified what they did through the gods, saying that the gods allowed them to do this. But Sargon justified what he did through his works. He said, I'm a humble leader. I was raised like you by a farmer, and so on and so forth. So he kind of appealed to the people in that way, and then was able to take over and ruled Sumer and Akkad for 50 years. And one of the first things that he did when he ruled was institute his daughter Enheduanna as the high priestess of the temple of Ur, the main temple in Sumer of Inanna. So he made her the high priestess there of Inanna. So they worshiped the goddess, which is a pretty stark contrast to the Sumerians, who were primarily worshiping the male deities.
And she wrote the tale of Inanna, or the myth of Inanna, didn't she?
She wrote a lot of poems,
Okay,
praising
dedicated.
Inanna.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
So you have the Sumerians. They get taken over by the Akkadians, and the Akkadians have a pretty short rule too, because outside of them there are these other nomads who are also gaining a lot of traction. And these nomads, in particular the Goodians, came out of nowhere and swooped down, and just like barbarians kind of just started destroying everything. And so there was this chaotic period in the kingdom of Sumer when there was no ruler. It was just these barbarians running rampant, and everything was just kind of just crazy. And we have a Babylonian text about this known as the curse of Agade, which is another word for akkad. And I'll read to you here a paraphrase. Enlil brought out of the mountain those who do not resemble other people, who are not reckoned as part of the land, the Goodians, an unbridled people with human intelligence but canine instincts and monkeys' features. Like small birds, they swooped on the ground in great flocks. Because of Enlil, they stretched their arms out across the plain like a net for animals. Nothing escaped their clutches. No one left their grasp.
Awesome.
Pretty weird, right? I mean, they're mentioned as these wild people with canine instincts and monkey features. I don't know what they meant by that. But go ahead. You had something to say?
No. I was saying, Vance, do you have a question or?
There's one that from a way back from DK Ultra, who was one of our super chat guys. This is a little bit out of sequence here, but he was wondering in relation to Ukraine, where the if the Illyrians came into play, is there a link with the Anunnaki and the Illyrians?
Illyrians. How do you spell it?
Illyrians. I think that's the way he's spelling it.
I'm not familiar with those people, so
Yeah, neither am
I can't help you there, brother. But I'll look into it.
Okay. And that's it. I did have a question too, which is we didn't talk about Planet X yet. Is it coming? When is it going to get here?
All right, we can get into that. Yeah, so I just wanted to give that foreground history on the Sumerians and their discovery and stuff like that, because I mean these are the people that wrote all this stuff, So I think we got to pay a little respect in our ancestors. I mean these are the real people who wrote this stuff down with their hands and left it all behind for us. So it's just fascinating. It's a fascinating history, and they pretty much were destroyed by the Akkadians, and these barbarians, and the Babylonians came. The Babylonians, as you were mentioning, Miguel, came with Hammurabi and some other kings, and that was like the first actual world power. The first new world order was the Babylonians. They came and totally changed the game, did what the Sumerians and the Akkadians could never do. But Planet X, man, I've been fascinated with that ever since I started getting into Sitchin. I just did a little reaction video on my YouTube channel to the first Planet X video I ever saw back when I was like 13 years old. So if you want to see my reaction or watch that video and share that sentiment, go check it out. But I don't know, man, because like when I first wrote this book back in 2018, I was a huge Sitchin fanboy. You know, I took everything he said as face value. But as I've matured, I've had to look at everything through my own critical scholarship. So I had to gut the entire book and look at all this stuff differently now. And there's not a lot of evidence in this actual Sumerian text for Planet X or Nibiru. And I've read all of Sitchin's books in his Earth Chronicle series. So there's about 7 books in the Earth Chronicle series, which he initiated back in the 70s. And you have to read the entire series to get to the same understanding he did as to how or why Planet X might be real. You know, he takes you across the whole world from the beginning of time up into modern times and shows you in excruciating detail, you know, how there might be this Planet X. So you can't just look to the Sumerian stuff for it. You have to look at all the other things that he wrote about to get to that conclusion. And in my mind, it's all one huge speculation, you know, and that's what makes Sitchin Sitchin. You know, that's what makes Zecharia Sitchin great, because at this point, including me, thousands of people have written about the Sumerians and the Anunnaki, you know, and a lot of the people honestly kind of just regurgitate his work. And that's what my first book, the first version of this book was actually just kind of a regurgitation of what he'd already said. But I wanted to do a different approach and just look at this stuff as a historian, you know, and show how monotheism was born out of this stuff. But what makes Sitchin great and unique is his Planet X and Nibiru theory and speculation. But that's all him. I give all that respect to him, and I can't say for certain through my research that it is real or that it's coming back. But if it is, hopefully not anytime soon.
We shall see. We shall see.
Yeah,
all right.
Like
well,
the Moonfall movie, right? I don't know if you've checked that out. The moon crashes into the earth.
Yes, I've heard.
Pretty wild.
All right, just looking at some of the other stuff, some of the slides. If you want me to keep going, Eddie.
Let me see what we're at. Yeah, I just don't know like if your pictures are out of line with mine, so I don't know if like how to reference them now. But guess we can keep it there for now. Yeah, so that's some brief history on the Anunnaki, or the Sumerian, I should say. If you want to learn more, of course, read the book. But now we'll get into the actual Anunnaki, you know, the actual gods, and start to prepare ourselves to how we got to monotheism. All right, so the Bible, right? The Bible talks about mankind being created in Genesis 1:26. And if you go to Genesis 1:26 in any English version, you will read as follows. And God created mankind, or he said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. So there's obvious plurality there. And any theologian will try to explain that away with some kind of religious philosophy. Well, he was talking to God, or he was talking to Jesus, he was talking to himself, he was talking to us, or something. You know, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Well, the reason there's plurality there is because there's a specific word used in the Hebrew. The word used, of course, is not God. The word used is Elohim. And the Hebrew says, and Elohim said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And Elohim, as many scholars and theologians have concluded, is a plural word, or can mostly be used as a plural word. And El means God, or mighty, or powerful. And Him, or Im, is a plural suffix like cherubim. So Elohim would mean, or could mean, the powerful ones. So what we're reading is the powerful ones said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness. So if we take the understanding, as I've presented earlier, that all of this stuff in the Bible and the Abrahamic faiths is coming from the Sumerian tales, who were the ancestors of the Israelites, then again, we're just reading a rendition of what their ancestors told them in the Enki and Ninmah texts. The Elohim, the Anunnaki, created mankind. And Sitchin didn't come up with this. He, in an interview that is still available online with, I believe, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, he talks about his influence being a famous Russian commentator on the Old Testament known as Malbim. And Malbim, living in the early to mid 1800s, wrote about this concept. And he says of the Elohim, and I'll quote here directly, "They are the ones that it said they fell from heaven. It is known that in all the ancient stories of the nations, they told that in the early days of the king over the kingdom, Benai Elohim came down from the heavens to the earth and ruled over it and married women from the sons of Adam, and to them were born strong, revered, perfect princes. Similar stories are found with the first kings of Egypt and Greece, which began from gods and half-gods that walked on high mountains, and the stories say that they were wonderful and strong." So this is coming from Russian-born commentator and rabbi Malbim, and he is beloved in Judaism and Judaic institutions. And this is the guy that influenced Sitchin with that whole idea when he was a young scholar. So again, there's one human history here, and it's just being told through different perceptions, through different cultures, but all of them are saying the same thing. We were born out of these Elohim, out of their image, and at some point they disappeared and left us here, and we're stuck with the institutions that they created. And some would say that a lot of the religious and governmental institutions today still hide their existence or the presence of through symbols, or the influence of the presence through symbols. And so the oldest text available to mankind right now, the oldest available text to all of us right now, going back to 2600 BC, is the Kesh Temple Hymn. And so we got to understand, man, this stuff is pretty weird if you think about it, right? Because we're so used to the world we live in, with technology and TV shows. But if you stop and think for a second, the oldest available text about our entire existence, this Kesh Temple Hymn, it is strange in what it has to say. And in this text, it talks about these gods, the Anunnaki, building these structures and praising themselves for these structures. And in the text, these structures are to be used for ceremonial practices. I'll quote a little bit from the Kesh Temple Hymn here. It says, "The house whose lords are the Anuna gods, whose Nuek priests are the sacrificers of N priest, ... because some of it is broken. We don't know what all it says, holds the lead rope dangling. The Atu priest holds the staff, takes his seat in the holy place. The Enkum priests bow down. The Pekek priests beat the drum skins. They recite powerfully, powerfully." So it goes on. It's just the whole Kesh Temple Hymn is just like this. It's talking about the Anuna gods, another word for the Anunnaki, building these structures which are meant to be religious sites, and these different priests setting themselves up for this ceremony. Now, again, this is the oldest text known to us, and this is what it has to tell us, which is just strange. What's going on here?
Yeah. It's there's something going on, something delicious, something Matrix, something science fiction. Who knows?
Yeah, man. Yeah, and in another ancient text, almost as old as that one, known as the Enki and the World Order, we see that the Anunnaki loved Sumer. Sumer used to be, the navel of the world, as I'll quote from here. "Sumer, great mountain, land of heaven and earth, trailing glory, bestowing powers on the people from sunrise to sunset. Your powers are superior powers, untouchable, and your heart is complex and inscrutable. Like heaven itself, your good creative force, in which gods too can be born, is beyond reach. The Anuna, the great gods, have taken up dwellings in your midst and consumed their food in your Geguna shrines. I mean, again, some of the oldest stuff that we've ever produced is talking about these gods.
Yeah, it's incredible and it's fascinating stuff. I don't know. Do you have more on the Anunnaki? Because I want to talk about the sections I love too, and it relates was the section on his harrowing of hell, going down to the Book of Enoch.
Okay.
But before we get to that, Vance, you have a question? I think was it Mark Jefferson, Mr.
Oh, yeah.
Alabama himself, Sweet
All
Home
right.
Alabama. Mark Jefferson had a question.
Yeah, he wanted to know if the Anunnaki made mention of the creator of all, and if that would refer to what we know as Gnostics as demiurge or someone higher. Did they have a God above God, in other words?
They do. I don't have any text to reference right now, but from what I know or understand, they do mention a creator of all. You know, they don't see themselves as the creators of the universe or of life. That's for sure.
Yeah, and it's a little bit different, right? Because Enki creates humans, but he's considered, like you said, in your other book, you tie him in very well to Lucifer. He's this sort of innovative, giving gifts to the humans.
Yeah, like Prometheus.
So Enki,
right?
he's very much like Prometheus, and in the myth, people don't realize Athena, wisdom, helps Prometheus create humans, give them intelligence and a soul and all that. Is when you got Nimna and Enki. The Gnostics shifted it because, yes, the demiurge is shaping the humans, but Sophia breathes in, like Athena, the soul and the spirit into the human. So the Gnostics are using the same template, except to them, you know, the Enki, the demiurge is, of course, is a complete babbling fool. He's an idiot, but, you know, there's always going to be these little shifts in the, you know, they'll tweak here. It's like a Batman movie. You're going to tweak a villain here, tweak, you know, what Gordon looks like. You know, that's how these myths are.
Evolution and devolution, right?
Yeah.
As the generations go on, people get mad. Like if there's a drought, and they start attributing bad things to the gods, right? And then they're, we said an idiot.
Demoted.
I had one. Here's the master one. Could it be that all these cultures who are sharing throughout time the stories and evolving them and transmogrifying these stories, could it be that they're guilty of, you know, a lot of anthropomorphism? It seems that all the stories cast the gods in some kind of human-like, you know, guise, like they're conscious, they kind of have the same kind of viewpoints as we do, they seem to live in the same time scale as we do, except if you go back with the waters and the spirit, and then it gets really weird. But nowadays we can kind of imagine some sort of weird beings whose time scale's immense, and perhaps humans got created through the intelligence of DNA or whatever, and things that we don't understand. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, our current human history is very short in the grand scheme of things. I personally believe that this planet has probably produced many civilizations that are just completely gone and obliterated into grains of sand at this point.
Yeah.
But in our specific history, yeah, we love to anthropomorphize things, and I think there's a blending going on. I think that like, for example, the Indo-Europeans, they did that a lot. The Indo-Europeans and the branches of those cultures, they love to anthropomorphize the storms and the rains and the earth and stuff like that. But I think there was a meshing of that and the stories of these physical beings that kind of got muddled. And then later on with like astrotheology and the zodiac and stuff like that, it all just kind of started to blend. It's kind of similar to like in the way where we like name streets after presidents or something, you know, it's like they named planets after gods.
Right. And who knows, maybe, you know, we didn't talk too much about this, but there might be visitors from the stars who came and related stories, which they translated. That's always like, just, we have that today with UFOs and so forth.
I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens.
Yeah.
Hey,
man.
gods are aliens, right? They're not like people.
Spirits are aliens. Ghosts would be
Yeah.
aliens. Interdimensional ghosts would be interdimensional beings. Yeah, I mean, we don't.
Yeah.
And I think, as scholar Dan McLennan was saying, we still live in a world we want to categorize and put in box, like, here's God, spiritual, powerful, omniscient, and here's human. But the ancients didn't have that concept. They were more holistic, and everything was in a spectrum. The stars, the earth, everything was part of one movement. So gods and humans had a lot of, you might say, a spectrum that often connected. And the gods were never meant to be omniscient, omnipresent. They weren't even eternal. Gods were immortal, but at some point the universe would stop and you just start the cycle again. Gods would be destroyed, humans would be destroyed, and back everybody has to clock in 9 to 5 at the beginning of time. Everybody's got a place in this universe. Nobody's better or worse. Everybody's part of the machinery. But
yeah, man.
Different times, good times, as the show said. So yeah, Eddie, I want to let's talk about let me know what you want to deal with first, the Book of Enoch or Jesus 3 days in hell, because
we can get into that. Let's start with the Jesus part. Yeah, so what Miguel is talking about is towards the end of my book, I start to question, is there any evidence of the Anunnaki remaining? Or how did we get to the point where they're completely gone and now we have monotheism? Because check this out too, right? We've been around for, as mainstream science says or whatever, about 6,000 years, right? 6,000 years, probably more than half of that we worshipped these gods, the Anunnaki. It wasn't until the last 2,000 years that we were believers in monotheism. It wasn't until the last 2,000 years that we were institutionalized into monotheism. And as I point out in the last chapter of my book, there was a reason for that. And it was a slow, painful process to basically rid ourselves of these gods and forget them and stop worshiping them. Mm-hmm. But one of those examples is this fascinating thing that I came across in the Bible, which I didn't even know was studied so heavily until I started doing the research for this. All right, so apparently there's a strange passage in 1 Peter 3:18 through 22. Mm-hmm. So in 1 Peter 3:18 through 22, there is one of the most enigmatic passages out of the entire New Testament. And it is a strange account of Christ's spirit going to a prison and preaching to the disobedient spirits of Noah's time. And Christianity.com, as I quote, says that this is the most cited Bible passage for the account of Jesus descending to hell before his resurrection. Mm-hmm. But this passage has been stumping scholars and theologians for hundreds of years because it is so strange in what it says, and also how it says is the words that are used, the terminology. And so in a thesis submitted back in 2002 for a degree in Master of Arts by a scholar known as Jason M. Hauff, titled Interpretation of 1 Peter 3:18 through 22, he says that the exegesis of 1 Peter 3:18 through 22 is a seemingly endless labyrinth of closely knit problems that has puzzled and motivated many. All who have attempted to unravel its secrets have soon realized that it is a notoriously difficult passage to interpret. And Martin Luther, even the famous Protestant reformer, said of it, "A wonderful text is this, and a more obscure passage perhaps than any other in the Testament, so that I do not know for a certainty just what Peter means. I cannot understand and I cannot explain it, and there has been no one who has explained it." It's a strange thing, and we're gonna uncover why it's strange, and we're gonna reveal the true meaning of the passage. And it does link into the Anunnaki, as you'll see, and how monotheism was institutionalized. All right, so let's just go to 1 Peter 3:18. Let me pull that up real quick. I feel like I'm the pastor here. Everybody get your Bibles out.
Praise
Peter,
Lil.
Was it 1 Peter, what? 3:18?
3:18 through 22. Everybody get out your Anunnaki Compendium Bible and go to.
1 Peter
All
3.
right, so I'm going to just read it for face value. For Christ also suffered once for sins, just like the pastor. I'm going to start reading it before you even get there. All right, so for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah. I'm going to stop there. It carries on, and the other half of it also has very intriguing aspects that theologians like to pick apart, but it's not relevant to what we're going to talk about. So Christ suffered, for the just, for the unjust, but where it gets strange is verse 19. This is where people start to get confused. It says, usually it's translated as by which also he went and preached unto the prison, the spirits in prisons. Sorry, let me back up. So in 3:18, it says that Christ died for our sins, and he was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. And then in 19, it's usually translated by which also he went and preached unto the spirits in prison. So this is where Christians will say, well, look, he went to hell and he vouched for our spirits and took them back from the devil or whatever. But nowhere in this passage does it mention hell.
No, it's a prison.
It's a prison, and there's a very specific reason for that. So the main questions a lot of theologians have is, who were the spirits in prison? Where is the prison located? What did Christ actually proclaim to these spirits? And when did this take place? Was it, during the 3 days he was dead, after he arose? What's going on here? So again, this all comes from a misunderstanding of translation. So, of course, the New Testament was originally written in Greek. Mm-hmm. And so in the original Greek, the opening of verse 19, which is by which or in which, initially read Enokai. That, but it originally read Enokai. Enokai. Enoki or Enokai, which means it by which or in which. But that is really close to Enoch in Greek, which is spelled Enox. So if you were to add a Greek, as they call it, chi, which is kind of like the omega symbol, I guess, the term in which also, if you were to add a Greek chi in between Enokai, the term in which also in verse 19 would transform to in which also Enoch, or in which, or also as Enoch, or like Enoch. So now if we go back and read it, for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. And originally, or the way most people read it would say, in which he also went to preach to the spirits. But how we should be reading it, according to certain scholars, in which also Enoch went to preach to the spirits in prison. A little confusing. So basically what it's saying is that Christ died, but was made alive in the spirit. And that alone troubles theologians, because it never says that he was made alive in the flesh. It says he was made alive in the spirit. So it's almost like, completely going against one of the main tenets of Christianity, that Christ resurrected in the flesh. But it says he resurrected in the spirit, and in which Enoch also. So it's basically saying the same way that Christ raised in the spirit, he raised in the spirit the same way that Enoch was also raised in the spirit and went to go preach to the spirits in prison. And this was noticed by scholars going all the way back to 1771 or 72. Matter of fact, there was a scholar named William Boyer who correctly translated the New Testament in that way back in 1772, substituting Christ in verse 19 as Enoch. And a couple 20th century scholars followed after that line of thinking, such as J.R. Harris in his 1891 essay known as A Further Note on the Use of Enoch in 1 Peter. He says, and I quote here, "These imprisoned spirits are the angels who sinned with mortal woman, for whose offense and its punishment the Book of Enoch is our prime authority. The very language used in Enoch for their place of punishment, this place is the prison of the angels, is in close correspondence with the Petrine expression. Perhaps, after all, the difficulty really arises from the fact that the subject of the word Enoch has dropped out of the context, and that the real person who made proclamation to the spirits in prison is not Christ, but Enoch himself."
Boom. So the Watchers are there, right there in the New Testament. So, I mean, the Watchers are there too. There's the passage where Paul is telling women, cover yourself when you're prophesizing because the angel will come and rape you. He's talking about the Nephilim. So,
Wow.
so they knew about it. Jesus, Paul, they knew. It was in the air. They knew about the Anunnaki and all that. Yeah, it was. We've been told a certain version, but they were smart guys. They knew. It was part of their culture too. It was part of their magic.
They were closer to those times and
Yeah.
so forth. And, you know, if we know about it, why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's the whole concept. I keep going back to. It's like there's only one human history. You know, we like to view things through our perception and our current day, but there's only one history. And like you said, Vance, those guys were closer in time to when the Book of Enoch was huge. It was a huge thing back then. And again, they were closer in time when the Anunnaki were still being worshipped. I mean, even when, as I detail in my book, when the Torah was being put together, during that time, the Anunnaki were still being worshipped by that name, by their name. So these guys knew of them. These were the other gods that Yahweh was against. But yeah, so that whole thing with 1 Peter 3:18, I never even knew that was like a huge deal until I started doing research for this book. So that whole transition from 3:18 to 3:19, the context is supposed to switch to Enoch. It's saying Christ died, was made alive in the spirit, and it was in that spirit or in that fashion, that form in which Enoch was also able to go to preach to the imprisoned spirits.
Very cool. Very cool.
And so what this all means, basically, I tie this all in towards the end of the book, that you're seeing a lot of things being omitted by the early church. You know, the Book of Enoch used to be huge. It's obviously all over the New Testament. We don't need to go into too much detail right now, but it's in the book. But of course, that got omitted, but there's still remnants of it. Like in Jude, a lot of Jesus's phrases are paraphrased from the Book of Enoch. So and the reason why the church wanted to do away with the Book of Enoch, at least one of the reasons, is because it talks about angels being corporeal, physical, mating with human women. And the church didn't like that. They didn't want that. They slowly wanted to do away with this idea of angels being physical. But all throughout the Bible, and the
also
Old Testament,
too, in ancient times, which was very Gnostic, the problems came into the world when the angels started controlling, meddling. They brought evil. They brought good too, but they brought tricksters. They brought a lot of trouble. So the church couldn't blame humans for it. You know what I mean? If you take the angels out of it, it's your fault, you sinners, Adam and Eve and all that. So.
Yeah, they invented makeup, didn't they? Did they say it? Doesn't the Bible say they taught the women how to make themselves up?
The Book of Enoch did,
Yeah,
man. So you start to see the Anunnaki phased out through monotheism. You know, monotheism doesn't work if you still know about the Anunnaki history. It doesn't work if you know about the fallen angel history and how they were corporeal, physical beings. Then it doesn't work. There's no magical being, creator of all things that is unknowable and unreachable. And all of that doesn't work. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam don't work in the institutionalized way if the Anunnaki are understood through their respective historical influence on all of this stuff.
Very true. And for the audience, there's so much more in his book, The Anunnaki Theorem. I would definitely check it out. We will have it on the show notes. The audio version of this should be out tomorrow, latest Thursday. Of course, the audio version will be on YouTube right after this. But don't forget, you can get it on Rockfin, Odyssey, places I go where I know when they drop the bomb and destroy my channel one of these days because I've mentioned, I don't know, COVID too much. But that you can go there, and I do take crypto. But yeah, and for Eduardo, for Eddie, I've got it right here. Where is it? This is, let's look at your, this is your YouTube channel for those interested. And this is where you got all your little mini documentaries. So if you want more, a lot more, he covers so much, and he's got all these very cool mini videos, mini documentaries. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's a treasure trove of good esoteric stuff.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. Yeah, also follow me on Instagram too, if you like, at Esoteric Eddy. A lot of random content on there and behind the scenes stuff too.
Yeah, cool. I follow your YouTube channel. I know, well, this is a different Gmail account, but I do follow my personal Gmail account, so it's a good channel, man. I need to follow you on Instagram for other stuff. So, but yeah, I think this is the end. It's been another great interview. I hope you guys were great there in the chat room. Good audience tonight. At times we had more than 150 watching, and I'm sure it'll be about 10 to 100 times more once the replays are out. So you guys are great. I'm glad you're looking for answers. We're all here looking for answers, and we're getting that gnosis, which at the end of the day, right, Eddie, it just makes us free. That's what we want. Freedom to make up our own damn minds and make our own mistakes instead of always been treated like cattle.
Yeah, man, I'm right there with you. That's why I do what I do, man, just to help us all move along and get free.
Awesome. Well, first of all, Vance, thanks for keeping us company and keeping all the engineers in line tonight and the laboratories of YouTube.
Oh yeah. Hey, they were great bunch tonight, and as Eddie, loved it. Very interesting stuff.
Thank you.
I admire your mastery of the subject.
Yeah. Tying it all together. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And it just makes a lot of sense. So awesome. Well, Eddie, yeah, thanks again. Always enjoyed you coming here at the virtual Alexandria. And anytime you have any other research or insights, come on down. Mi casa es tu casa. My prison is your prison. Jesus and Enoch will come save us.
Absolutely, man. One last thing. The documentary version is actually going to be released this weekend too of the book. So if you're not ready to buy it, you can watch the documentary version this weekend.
Awesome. Well, check it out. Yeah, check it out.
Great.
Don't waste your time with stupid films like Thor, Love and Thunder, or She-Hulk, or the really bad content, or Rings of Power, which is so bad, but I can't stop watching it. As I was telling Luthien Vance, I'd rather have a world with bad Tolkien than a world without Tolkien. I can't help it. Terrible. It's terrible. But what are you gonna do? But I'd really, yes, watch his documentary. It's 1,000 times better than Rings of Power. And I know Eddie didn't spend $1 billion like Amazon did, but I have a feeling the quality is probably close up as good as that turd that they call TV these days. But anyway, I don't want to be like old man yelling at the clouds here. So everybody, really enjoyed it. Again, thanks, Eddie. Thanks, Vance. Thank you in the chat. Thanks those of you who you are here. And as I always say, yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for being yourself, your true self, here in the desert of the real. Write your own gospel, live your own myth. Until next time, take care, everyone, and good night.
Bye.